Sorry for the delay. So just for a little background on this project, so about 4 years ago, I had a back injury and it prevented me from doing pretty much anything. I was laid up in bed. And so through that, I learned that the only thing I could really do to get some activity in my life was to learn how to swim. So I learned how to swim in my tiny little condo pool, which I could barely swim a lap at the beginning, but progressively swam more and more because that's all I could do. And then after I got a back surgery and I'm all better now, yay. And but then I went outside and into the water in the Lake Ontario and Lake Erie and have just loved it and been doing more and more of it ever since. And so for me, open water swimming is a totally different experience than pool swimming. You're sort of in nature and with usually other people, and it's just a totally different experience. And so that's really the part of swimming that I love. But what's different about open water swimming, obviously, than swimming in a pool is that you've got a lot of considerations when you go out to swim in the water. So you've got water quality issues. So there might be algae or bacteria in the waters that would make you sick. So you want to kind of know when that's going to be the case, and you want to know it in a timely fashion so you can kind of decide where you're going to swim. And then there's water conditions, like water temperature is a big one, but also how clear the water is, things like that. And then obviously weather conditions. If it just rained previously, that there's a high chance that that's going to increase the bacteria in the water. So you want to be able to see historic data, but also is it going to be raining out, when I'm going to go to the beach or get in the water. And then also just who else is swimming? Is this a safe area to swim? Is there a group swimming there? Can I connect with them? So those are all kind of different than what you might see in a pool. Some of them overlap. So when I was open water swimming, because I'm a software engineer, I was kind of looking around at all these different resources. Actually, that's on the last slide of the city of Toronto collects E. coli information. The weather, all the weather websites and apps that people use has the weather. There's a site from an organization called Swim Drink Fish called the Swim Guide, and they have a lot of good information. There's Wind Finder, which has wind and wave heights. And so there's a lot of good information out there, but when I just want to go for a swim, I don't want to sit down for a half hour and look at all these different websites and kind of pull it together. And I might even want to check a few different sites and different water, areas where I might swim all at once. And so with my background of this data platform, I decided it would be great to pull all this stuff together into one place. And so that's where openwaterdata.com came from. Hopefully I can pull it up here. And so this is what the site looks like. It's still a work in progress. I've been working on it for about a year. But the challenge is how do we pull all this information together and then sort of provide an interface or visualize it so that it's easy for somebody that's getting ready to go for a swim or wants to explore a new area to learn more about that beach or that area. So I've started primarily in the Greater Toronto area because that's where we are. So when you pull up the website, it tries to find your location as best it can, and then it shows you a map like we're all familiar with from Google Maps. And then it puts these pins in the various beaches or areas where people are typically swimming. And so you can click on one of those pins and you can see they're kind of color coded. Right now, luckily for us in Toronto, they're all green, and that means that they're passing water quality tests that are run at those beaches. Some are just gray. That means there's no testing there. So you're on your own to decide, but you can kind of find beaches around it and make some judgments on whether or not it's going to be safe to swim. So if you click on one of the pins, it shows you sort of the most interesting information that swimmers want to find out about quickly. And so in this case, we've got Ontario Place West passed with 17 mpm, which is a measure of an E. coli level. So if you get familiar with that, 17 is really good. It's really low. Around here, if it's about 100 or so, then you start to get a little bit worried that you might get sick or children might get sick in the water. The next measure is coming from a different data source, but it's basically saying the same thing, that it passed the test. It's showing you the water temperature is 18 degrees Celsius. And below each of these, it's got the date that sample or that piece of information became available. And so that helps you judge as well, because E. coli levels sometimes are only measured once a week. So if it's stale, you want to take that into consideration that things may have changed. You may want to look at other information. And we've got the air temperature and basic weather information. If you click the little more link, that takes you to sort of an in-depth look at that particular beach. So there's all the information that we just looked at, but in this case, it's also got wave height, visibility in the air, precipitation, and lots of other things that are often sampled in the water, like pH levels, alkalinity, things like that. I won't get into all those details, but more scientific information. But sometimes, like I said, when it rains out, you want to actually know, did it rain recently? And so each of these data tiles that are being collected from different places that I can talk about a little bit more can be clicked on so that you can see a history of what was collected in the past. And so initially 30 days comes up, but you can actually zero in and look at, for a specific day or 3 days or look a longer time out. But then to the people here might be more interested in that it's open data. So you can actually click on CSV or JS, which is sort of for JSON. You can also expand the chart to see it a little bit larger. So you can actually download the data behind the chart. And you can get all of data from all of time and download that, and it will show you, it'll have the data that you see here graphed out, but it also has additional information, like what's the data source, and even who collected that data, if that information is available. So there's a lot of deep information that's being collected and that's shared as open data. And the same is true for all these other files. So you can see what the E. coli level was in the past, so you know if it's typically good or bad, and so on. So one of the big challenges with pulling this together was how to gather this information. So as I said, my software company has a platform that makes it so that you can reach out and integrate with other APIs and other systems. And so I kind of went out and searched for all the places where this information could be pulled from. And I mentioned a bunch of those sources when I was just going through what the different websites people would go to are. And that's really where it's pulling these things from. I won't get into that detail. We can talk about that in the QA if people are interested in that. But there's maybe like 24 data sources right now, and some are being pulled, some are push. There's different ways to collect that data. But each region and country has different information and different regulations, and what E. coli level is considered a foul. And so there a lot of effort went into modeling and making that information specific to each beach, so that if it's failing because it's in Toronto versus New York State, and there's a lot of considerations like that. The other thing that was a challenge in particular that is surprising and was surprising to me as a swimmer is the water temperature. It's really hard to get water temperature. There is modeled data that is released every day, and that's what everybody typically goes on. But it turns out when you actually look at that data and compare it to real temperature readings that are being taken, they're like wildly different. And so the question was, how do we get water temperature information? And so this watch that I'm wearing is a Garmin watch. A lot of open water swimmers wear it to kind of track their performance. But one of the benefits is it's got a GPS in it, and it also happens to have a water temperature sensor in it. And so my initial attempt to at least gather some water temperature data was to allow open water swimmers to sign up, connect their Garmin watch to the site, and then anytime they swim, it automatically uploads their data. And as you can see on this map here, it also shows where people are swimming, sort of that green blobby thing, at a beach, which is also useful for safety. So if you want to know where people are swimming and where it's probably safe for you to swim, you can kind of see, people are swimming from Ontario Place all the way over to Toronto Island to the Louis Bishop Airport. None of this is being recommended, but this is just what people are doing. And so you can get a general idea of where people are, and there's enough people using all the beaches in the Greater Toronto area that it's cool. You can kind of pop around to the beaches and see where people are swimming. It's kind of neat. But also, each of those swims, it's collecting the water temperature for roughly every second on some of these watches, and then it's getting the median of that water temperature and then reporting that in the data. And that's why when you see and download the open data, it will say Steve Hulford collected this data at this time while he was swimming. And so it's kind of neat to see that come together and get aggregated. But obviously that is very, you have to have people sign up for that to be useful. So I needed to come up with some way to scale it out, and I was kind of at a loss as to how to do that. And then I met Steve. So, all right. So, press a button.
Sure. And I'm Steve Hulford. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been someone who has started a number of businesses, usually like through a passion or an interest of mine, and then get a group of people excited about it, and we create a business out of it. And I've been a lifelong swimmer. I used to swim for Canada, swam at the University of Toronto, and actually had a fear of dark and open water as a kid. And then I took that into my childhood. And I guess I was around 40 and was up at a friend's cottage. And we did one of those, after a few drinks, what if we swam across the lake to this place? And I jumped in the water and I realized that fear was gone. And it was replaced by like just intrigue. And this group of friends decided, hey, well, why do we have to go up north to swim? Why can't we swim in Toronto? So we started the Toronto Island Lake Swim. And in 2012, we used Google Maps to sort of check the coastline. And you could see where it was just nothing but sand. And I've since learned Toronto, like Lake Ontario is just a sandy bowl, with the odd rock. There's lots of old infrastructure down there, very little garbage. The odd shipwreck and nothing else. And we found this beautiful piece of beach that went from the Toronto Island Pier to Ward's Island, or the Center Island Pier to Ward's Island. And we said, that's where we're going to swim. And I was swimming, this is 2012, September, and I was swimming off of Hanlon's Point on one weekend, and I was telling my friends, we got to go next weekend. It was incredible. The water was like 22 Celsius. It's going to be incredible. And then we went the next Saturday to Ward's Island. We got in the water and it was like 12, 13. And that was my introduction to the lake turning over. And we actually did. We had no wetsuits on. We had very little experience in swimming in open water. And we swam from Ward's Island to the Center Island Pier. And it took us about 5 hours to warm up afterwards. And then we decided, like, wow, this is something a lot of people would probably enjoy. So in 2013, we launched the Toronto Island Lake Swim. And we went down the rabbit. We discovered Toronto actually has an incredible history of open water swimming that goes back 100 years. It's like during the CNE, the marquee event was the marathon swim, which I have to think would have been awfully boring. But they had Foster Hewitt on the radio broadcasting live across Canada this marathon swim. And women did it and men did it, and 300,000 people would stand and watch. And it was sponsored by the Wrigley Chewing Gum Company, and huge prizes went out. And this went on into the 50s, and there were marathon swimmers from Toronto that made big bucks. Like Cliff Lumsden was one of these guys. And in that same group was Marilyn Bell, who was the first to swim across Lake Ontario in 1954. The first person to swim across Lake Ontario was a 16-year-old girl who beat everybody and has become a legend. So the Toronto Island Lake Swim started in 2013, and every year for 6 years, we had to contend with the lake, which is fickle. We had all kinds of these problems that Mitch was talking about. Like, we would go out there on the Friday and we would take the water temperature and it would be like 12. And we'd be like, oh my, we have to cancel the race, which was on Sunday. And it would warm up. And by Sunday, it'd be like 16 or 17. Or some years we had it easy. It was 23 Celsius. Some years we had to contend with E. coli. Some years we had to contend with weight. And it was just constant. And there was not even cellular data on that side of the lake. So we'd have to drive across the island and send a text message or an email to all the swimmers. So we're all waiting. What's the water temperature? And I kept thinking to myself, why can't we just get real-time water temperature? Surely we can get real-time water temperature. And after running the Toronto Lakes Swim for 6 years, we had to cancel it because of the flooding on the island, and then the pandemic happened. But this effect, the lake turnover, I don't know if any of you have ever had to deal with this, but the lake, we've seen it with these water temperatures that we have in the water go from 23 to 4 overnight. And you can go from like just beautiful water to like fog. And it's this lake effect turnover that happens where you get a storm or lots of wind that'll move the water column and the bottom comes to the top. And it could be 23 and like green and lots of algae, but warm. And then the next day it'd be like crystal clear, beautiful water, but 4 or 5. And this turnover effect just happens mostly from storms and wind. And so in the week leading up to our swim, I would just be praying that this didn't happen. And we did have it happen once. And again, we saw it go from like 9 on Friday to 16 on Sunday. And during the pandemic, my daughter is a national ranked swimmer, and all the pools were closed. So it was March of 2020. And we decided to get in the water. We got the right gear. That's me on the break wall there. And we swam year round that year, 2020, 2021. And we swam over 200 kilometers, 67 swims. And we swam all the way from the border of Etobicoke at Marie Curtis Park, all the way to Bluffers, over 60 or 70 swims. And we did that mostly in the cold, like in the winter, like the sort of March, April, May, before the boats started to get in the water. And it was an incredible experience because nobody was in the water, for one. And there was no vegetation. It all died. So it was crystal clear. And we got to see Toronto from a perspective few people ever get to see, which is what's on the bottom. And when you're driving along the lakeshore and you look out in the lake and it's just dark and you just think it's like this, abyss, it's actually beautiful. There's something really beautiful about it. And it is just this sandy bowl with aged infrastructure from a bygone era. There's that break wall, which is in ruins, which in itself is quite interesting to explore. And then the odd shipwreck here and there. But it's remarkably clean. Saw very little garbage and not a single fish. But again, this itch came back to me. It's like, why can't we have real-time water temperature? Because again, we're contending with all this problem. Cherry Beach is really, really warm because it's a man-made bay. And then, you're out in the beaches and it's exposed to the lake. Probably not even a few hundred, 300 or 400 meters offshore is like 200 feet of water. And it can get quite cold there. So I started to explore this. It was the pandemic. I had some free time on my hands, and I said, I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna put some water temperature sensors in there. And I discovered the Internet of Things, and I discovered this sensor controller, which I bought from the Czech Republic. The Sigfox network, which is this incredible, it's called LoRaWAN internet. And it sends low packets of data long distances, and it just so happens to cover Lake Ontario. So this little device over here on the left, we can program it to send packets of data every 30 minutes. What's the water temperature now? And it can send it over Sigfox. We can get all kinds of data. And it'll go back to sleep, and the battery will last for 4 or 5 years. And that device is quite inexpensive. It can spit out. It's got a server that can spit out an API, JSON API, and you can get. It's also got an accelerometer in it. There was 2 water temperature sensors in the first one we had. And then we started to talk to the manufacturer about getting one that when we explained what our application was, because the first I did it on 5 or 6 beaches, and I discovered the biggest problem I was contending with was not what's the water temperature, but the buoy problem. How would I get this sensor into a buoy and then in the lake? And that's where we've spent most of our time. I started with inflatables. I 3D printed something. I would buy buoys and jerry rig them to put mine on. I put 3D printed caps on existing buoys. The city lent us their buoys and we mounted it inside there. And then we've kind of settled on this. This was Mitch's idea, and it's just an Epsom salt package, or like what you salt your driveway with. And the sensor sits there with marine glue stuck to the top, the water temperature out here, a nice handle with a chain, a cinder block, and an anchor, and this won't move. It's very small in the water. We originally tried to go through the proper channels to get approval to put them in the water, and then we discovered actually that anybody can put a buoy in the water. It's just a matter. It's probably goes back to like fishermen that need to track where their lobster traps are and things like that. As long as it's not too big, it's not in a navigable channel. Says private buoy on it with contact information. And then I became a technical advisor to Swim Guide and Swim Drink Fish. I'm a huge fan of them. All those swim races were sponsored by Swim Guide, and we were always trying to raise awareness for how important it is to keep these freshwater lakes clean. And the data would flow into Swim Guide, and swimmers finally could figure out what the water temperature was in real time. And then they knew what to wear when they went down to the lake. Was it a Speedo or a wetsuit? Or I'm not going to go, it's too cold for me. So we've had a lot of fun with it. And, we've just getting our toes wet, unintended. There's a lot of possibility. And, we'd love to put more data into these buoys, checking like E. coli levels. There's so many other things we can check and monitor. And really the sky's the limit. We imagine these everywhere. Babysat by open water swimmers who really are the ones the most vulnerable in the water and have a great need and interest in this, but really like the data itself could be, of great value to municipalities and all over the world. Is that our last slide? There you go.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
Pardon? Well, no, I think we'll do some Q&A. So we don't have, maybe we can do like 5 to maybe 10 minutes of Q&A. So we'd like to make sure that we're getting questions online and in the room. So if you've got a question and you're online, please type a Q in the chat and we'll call your name. But while we let the sort of online chat queue populate, is there a question in the room? Yeah, Chris.
My question is about swimming and the legality of what it's like to swim in open water. So, for example, we're all, I'm sure, familiar with the Kevin O'Leary case and all of that situation. The idea that if you are out there swimming and there's boats out there, I'm wondering if there's any kind of, like if on the map or whatever, if there's anything there that demarcates where is, from that perspective, a safe place to swim versus not.
Well, I mean, I think that between the hours of 9 and 5 in the summer when the lifeguards there, they have swimming zones and swimming pits. I believe you're supposed to stay within those swimming zones, and the lifeguards are going to keep watch over you. Technically, you shouldn't be swimming outside those zones. I don't know if there's a law or a bylaw against that. I know that the lifeguards try and chase you down if you do leave. We try and swim early in the morning after they've gone, and we go anywhere we want to go. And we're worried about boats. Currents aren't so much of an issue in the area. But we swim with a float around with a waist belt and a big inflatable buoy that's pink or orange that really is there for boats or jet skis to be able to identify swimmers. And more people are using these. But it really is something you do at your own risk. It's a little bit like hiking, or something like that, where you're at your own risk.
For the website, I'm actually thinking about that. Eventually, it's not crowdsourced information on sort of that water temperature, stuff. But I want to more crowdsourced people who do spend in a certain area or most of the beach can actually notate on the map and get safely swim and where the beach, share the beach strips, don't know the buoys and the cars. Well, outlined, but that also places that regulated swimmers that know the area.
And there's so many variables, skill levels, and you're down at Cherry Beach, for example. There's kite surfers with those fins, and I mean, if they hit a swimmer, they're probably coming up that. So there's it is quite a risk to be out there swimming.
Thanks. I think Ingrid had a question online.
Yeah, good.
Go ahead. Actually, so just as a note, we can't really hear Mitch very well. So that last half just kind of got dropped off. I am an open water swimmer too, and I hate swimming in a pool. I hate running into walls. There's nothing like swimming outside and really getting into your stroke. So my question is, weather seems to be a lot more, well, it's always been dramatic, but it seems to be more so in the way of runoff from rivers. And so I'm wondering about your data collection and E. coli and other things that we need to be aware of. Is that still done by humans and then uploaded to a site, and then that's the site where you collect the data? So that's my one question. The other one is that, like on Ontario Place, they're looking at a whole bunch of changes. With the therm spa going in, and there's a sewage outflow that comes right off out of exhibition. So just curious as to where your data might be able to be used to protect our lovely swimming areas. Thank you.
Good questions. So the E. coli data that's being collected on the site is being collected from a number of different organizations. For Ontario Place that you mentioned, for example, Swim Drink Fish is an organization that they're literally going down to the beach, doing measurements. I actually volunteer with them frequently. And so there's actual people doing the monitoring, and then that data gets reported into their systems, and the website is actually integrated. They happen to record theirs in a Google Doc, so it's integrated into their Google Doc, and it regularly pulls that information and then displays it on the website. And they also have the swimguide.org, and they display that information there as well. And so this is real data that's being collected. There are models that are out there that are being used by the city of Toronto. They were last year, that is, but currently, to my knowledge, all of the E. coli data on the website is actual real measured data. All the data sources are measured data.
It's got like a 2-day latency.
Yeah, there's typically 24 hours.
Okay, that was my.
Yeah, from when it's measured, they have to actually process it in a lab, and it takes 24 hours for that process to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And then, so just in regards to Ontario Place, how could we use your data to help protect our good swimming areas?
So right now, it's just sharing data to help you protect yourself, essentially. But I think it helps raise awareness, and I've been working with Swim Drink Fish, and that is their sort of goal and function, is to raise awareness and to help keep waters clean. So I'm kind of leaving that aspect of it to Swim Drink Fish at this point, but I'm certainly open to any ideas that you might have. Part of the goal of the website is to help educate people to understand this more. I don't know if I think I'm still sharing. Am I still sharing? Each of these data tiles you can actually click on. So for example, if we click on the water temperature, the E. coli level, there is a lot of good information here that I've gathered from a lot of different places that talk about the E. coli level. It's even customized to the specific location to tell you what the Pascal levels are here, where those regulations are listed, how many samples are taken. It talks about, you mentioned like combined sewer overflows, which is an interesting topic I won't get into for the sake of time, but that's a whole conversation. Rain, birds, all this other, there's a lot of good information here. And so the website does try to educate people or allow them to be educated if they want to dive deeper into any of these, even water temperature. There's some information about that.
Great, thanks, Ingrid. Another question in the room? We've got Chris.
So I love this open data. I really thought that smart buoy platform was incredible. Also because I think it seems like we took sort of everything except the last two on the end, where it went to the swim guide and the buoy. There's like a platform for collecting general open data. Like imagine you wanted to measure how loud things were, for instance. You basically got a system that could conceivably do that sort of stuff. Have you considered like turning it into a platform or anything like that? That like an open data collection platform or something that people could build on top of? It seems like I think about me personally, there's a bunch of stuff that if you get like a little, surreptitious kind of thing with a 5-year battery life, you could like leave somewhere and collect some like atmospheric data or noise data, or potentially with a little computer vision, some traffic data. Potentially you could really illuminate the city potentially with this technology.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't hear you well.
So to your point, though, I feel like you're a plant. You're allowing me to plug. So there is a platform underneath this. It's called Web Command, and I can talk about it more in the breakout. But this whole thing is built on top of that platform that it works very well for collecting open data from a lot of different APIs and then making it easy to expose that through an API for whatever purpose you want.
All right, any other questions online?
Yeah, Steve has a question. Although maybe I can read it out. Oh, it looks like Steve's unmuted.
Yeah, so how do we find you? Do you have a contact information you could throw in the chat?
Yeah, if you go to openwaterdata.com and then about in the top right, there's a LinkedIn
Perfect.
link.
Perfect, thank you.